It was a good run. And I might jump back and play every once in a while. Yeah, about 50 to 60 hours, we kind of like maxed out the game for the most part. So we'll see how it goes. Got to see what else I want to stream now that the Monster Hunter-ness is done. Was it a week? Did it even last a week? Yeah, all right. Decent. Decent enough.
Decent enough. That's kind of how I feel too, Max. Hi everyone, my name is Michael, and I feel kind of bad for saying this, but I expected more from Monster Hunter Wilds. This is my gut feeling, and I'm going to do my best to voice some thoughts on why I feel a bit disappointed, while also trying to be constructive towards this series I enjoy so much. I want you to take a look at this screenshot by Reddit user blobnomcookie. Somehow, we are in a very similar position with Wilds to what we were in with World's launch on PC 7 years ago in a number of ways, and that is what is frustrating me the most. Monster Hunter is too good to be experiencing these issues still, and constantly having mixed reviews on launch since moving into this post-World era of the franchise. I said in my channel introduction that I didn't want to make scripted videos, and this wasn't the first video I had planned, but I felt it was important to get something out there that maybe some other folks in the community are feeling as well, as sort of a reference point summarizing the release state of 6th gen. And I think it's important to specify release state and then look at and think back to base Rise, base World, and then the base old gen games as well. I have a feeling that a lot of folks are going to feel some form of letdown having played Iceborne or Sunbreak, getting to Wilds, and then not looking at the game from a release context. I also want to preface this video by saying that I have enjoyed the game, and I think overall it is still offering so much despite the issues. It's Monster Hunter. It has always delivered value for money with gameplay and how much playtime is on offer, especially when we put it in perspective with the gaming landscape today. But that doesn't mean that because we got 50 to 150 hours of great gameplay that I can't look at areas I think are lacking and say, damn, I was hoping for a bit more there, when this series has been setting a high bar and setting precedents, at least in terms of content, for over 10 years now.
Like, this is normal. Like, this is, so like, I don't think people should be like, people who are like hypercritical about the game not having enough content, which I find hilarious. People
like what's that? I put 100 hours into it and I just can't play this game anymore. It's like, wait, it's like, what?
I put 100 plus hours in this game, man. This game just has no, I'm like, dude, are you fucking
It's not the same for me.
I love you guys, but are you really gonna sit here and say that it's hilarious or wrong to be critical about the content on offer? That in Capcom's biggest release ever after over 5 years of development and full AAA pricing for a next-gen Monster Hunter game, you guys got 60 hours of Wilds on release, and you're already playing GU again. I've been enjoying Max and his crew's commentary on the series recently, and I generally agree with most of it, but I think you guys missed on this. Max said,
was it a week? Did it even last a week?
People are happy with the game. What I and many other folks are saying is that we were wanting and expecting more from this series after this long in development, with the perspective of Monster Hunter growing and constantly improving over 20 years now. You can say I'm spoiled or ask what more do I want, and I would respond with, why are you happy with the status quo, and where are the improvements and the lessons we've learnt with the series being applied? So for context, I am currently HR 250, and it took over 150 hours played with 100% Steam achievements, which I got at about 127 hours played. I have been making my own fun, squeezing every drop out of the game, doing crowns for the first time ever, and doing the usual bit of deco farming and optimizing of a few endgame builds. I started with Try over 10 years ago when I was maybe 12 or 13, and I love this series to bits. I have just over 2,000 hours in World, just under 400 hours in Rise, and probably in the 4,000 to 5,000 hour range on old gen across saves from GU, 4U, 3U, Try, and Freedom Unite. I feel that I am pretty well equipped to speak on the series fairly, and I'm not just an old fart that gatekeeps the series and thinks that old gen is the best Monster Hunter even though I do miss it. I believe that World Iceborne is currently the best this series has to offer, but there are elements from all the different games that excel more than others. Alongside FromSoft's games, Monster Hunter is really the only other series I play these days just because they are consistently great games and I think they deliver on quality, value, and still offer so much in a time with the gaming landscape being much more in flux and different now than it was even say 10 years ago. As one of my last bastions for a great gaming experience I can rely on, I want the best for this series. And amazing as it has been seeing the franchise grow recently, I want that to continue. And I think that's why I'm feeling motivated to even make this video and talk into this mic and share my thoughts to God knows how many people. It could be 5 or 5,000. These games have taught me a fundamental belief that with the advancement of time, there is growth, learning, and improvement from what came before. It has been 7 years since 5th gen released, and we know that Wilds has been in development for at least 5 years. Throwing in a couple of pandemic years, this all lines up with the mainline release cycle of about 5 years, starting with MH3 in 2009, MH4 in 2013, and mhwilds in 2018. The crux of this video boils down to my main belief that we are in a position very similar to what we were in 7 years ago with Release Patch World, and that I'm getting frustrated and tired of this. That with the amount of success the series has had since World, the golden goose that Monster Hunter has become, we are still having a lot of the same issues we had years ago with World in certain areas. The endgame system, the amount of content, the roster not being fully utilized, the performance and visuals, the UI, and the multiplayer experience. I think it is easier to excuse World for the issues on release that it did have since it was such a massive change from old gen in many areas, even though World was actually still built on the old MT framework engine. Wilds not so much. After the success of World and to a lesser degree with Rise, I would assume the development team has grown substantially to really capitalize on and continue riding the wave of money the series is worth now. So with a much bigger team and more development time than World had since MH4, it's really hard for me to not speak up about issues as trivial as multiplayer cutscene skipping and rejoining still being a problem 7 years later and expecting growth in these areas. This is not a new engine or some leap like World was from old gen. Rise on PC with the RE engine released 5 years ago. The gameplay hook and combat is the main thing I can really point to that has really moved forward and improved, among some more minor tweaks and changes to things like cooking and map traversal with the secret. In my estimation, this is the best combat the series has seen so far, and I'll talk a bit about that towards the end of the video and give the game its flowers. The main reason we are all here is for the gameplay, and as much as Ryozo wants to think that Wild's riveting story is the driving force behind the game's success on launch, I don't think any of us are going to sit here and credibly say that we wanted more or are not satisfied with just how good Wilds feels to play. I'm not going to talk about Wild's story in this video at all. I feel the same way about it as I do all the Monster Hunter plotlines. They are there to serve and progress the gameplay, with some cool lore, ecology, some throwaway characters, a couple endgame surprises, and that's it. The monsters themselves are really the characters in these games.
People wish for a story with Monster Hunter, but I don't give a fart. I'm here to hunt.
Thanks, Henry. So when I say I expected more from Wilds, I'm talking about all of the structure and these other areas that support and facilitate the awesome gameplay on offer. With that summary done, maybe there are some folks out there watching this that feel the same way and want to keep listening. I want to expand on some of the positives and negatives about the game in a bit more detail, so if you do stick around to listen to some Kiwi dude bang on about Wilds more, thank you, and I'll try to keep the rest of this video as short of a yapping session as I can, as well as putting some timestamps in the description below. First, I want to just voice some frustrations with some fiddly annoyances and oversights in the game that frankly shouldn't be here after this long in development. I am playing on PC, and thankfully there are some options the mod community has already come up with to alleviate certain issues. Console folks are sadly not as fortunate. I shouldn't have to use a mod to disable the over-the-top glowing defense and attack buff effect on my character when there are a host of options within the game settings to toggle things like ally hit effects or ally critical effects. I can even hide other players' secrets. At the time of this video, the glow removal mod has over 60,000 downloads. You're telling me nobody thought about this during the entire playtest and development period of this game? As far as I can see and remember, there was no glow removal mod needed for World because the effect wasn't so overt like it is in Wilds. This was the persistent glow in World, and you can see that it is a slow pulse that is not as bright and not even visible half the time. With Wilds, you can see that there is a solid red outline on the player at all times, and the pulsing is much faster. Why? Why is something small like this being changed and we are going backwards in tiny areas of detail that didn't need to be changed? I shouldn't have to use a mod to disable the fucking influx of pop-ups on the right side of my screen saying that a camp has been discovered or destroyed, or that a target has appeared on my map, or that an environmental upsurge has begun, or that I have an unclaimed login bonus. When you're opening the map so frequently checking for quests, looking for decoration or Arshan part rewards, opening the map to use NPC facilities, or opening the map just to fast travel, it is insane to me that you are not able to open the map with a pop-up on the screen and you need to hold a button to skip through these before you can do something basic. And then once you do open the map, you are in the partial map. From there you have the detailed map, you have the environment overview, and you have the world map. It is extremely fiddly to change between the map types and knowing when you need to go into a submenu to do what you're actually trying to do. For some reason, you cannot actually click on a lot of the UI elements within the map. You need to press the details or the confirm option, which are on separate keybinds. You cannot just click or double click on a target or resource to bring up other options without using your keyboard on PC. When you are in the correct submenu, for example here in the environment overview after hovering on the upsurge I want to target, I can click on the menu option, but I only get given an option to set a highlight, not set a waypoint. Setting a waypoint is actually on a third keybind, and I cannot use my mouse at all to do this. It is completely insane and so unintuitive, at least here on PC. It takes a lot of getting used to actually use the map effectively and getting used to the keybinds you need to use and in what order. Look at World's map for example. Even with messages and pop-ups on the right side, you could open the map still. First issue solved 7 years ago. Secondly, you can click on camps, and that gave you an option to fast travel to them, with the keybind to set a waypoint being an option for people wanting to travel on foot. Thirdly, you couldn't click on a target to track it, but you did have a persisting UI element in the bottom left that you could click on to set it as a target for the scout flies to track. There is no details option, no confirm option, no submenu that you need to open in order to set a waypoint. This map was easier to use 7 years ago. Insane. I also found something bizarre in the Smithy UI that changes the way forging and upgrading works. Even though a lot of weapons have the forge icon on them, you actually cannot build them without having the prerequisite upgrade. Take the Folger Anjanath SNS here. I cannot forge or upgrade this yet, so first I build the Gypceros SNS. Now the forge option unlocks for Anjanath that I can now build separately at any time, and I can also upgrade further in the Gypceros tree. This is identified with a 90-degree broken line where you need to forge separate individual weapons to keep progressing on a tree rather than just upgrading. This is a bizarre change, which I've probably done a poor job of explaining here, but I think is most easily identifiable with the Gormagala weapons. If you look at the tree, first you need to forge the Rathian SNS, which is fine. That makes sense that you have to start somewhere. Then that allows you to forge the Rathalos SNS, not upgrade into it, and then that allows you to forge the Megala SNS, not upgrade into it. So what you end up with is 3 sword and shields because you had to forge them. Both the Rathian and Rathalos weapons which you didn't want, and the Megala weapon you did want. It is strange, and has made weapon upgrading even more confusing for players when before, you were upgrading through the tree and only forging a weapon to shortcut to a certain base point on the tree at the expense of more materials. That is all forging was. Asmund Golden's initial thoughts completing base world had this to say on World's UI.
Oh yeah, the UI for the game was garbage, but I mean, it's like one of those things where once you understand the UI, then it's fine. It wasn't really intuitive to me. It's for console, right? I mean, not that makes it okay to be bad, but like, it's just like the logic for the UI was bad. and it was like not what I would have expected.
And that was 7 years ago with a game that was originally built for console and then ported to PC. It is embarrassing that we are still having weird UI issues and things that are still very unintuitive with menuing, keybinds, radial menu, and loadouts now that the games are being simultaneously developed and released on all consoles as well as PC, when people have been giving feedback and talking about UI for years at this point. Multiplayer connectivity has been a talking point in the community on launch as well, and I think that has been a problem for some folks solely because of the menuing and lack of information provided as to how certain features actually work. I think the new systems like Link Party, Squad Lobbies, Online Single Player, and Environment Link actually work well enough once you understand them and their limitations. But it is daunting, especially to new players, to have all of these different systems and to know what to use in order to play with specific people. Crossplay is great to see, even though that is largely the reason for the introduction of some of these different connectivity systems. Personally, I've been barely using the environment link, since most of the time if you want to fire up a quest on your map, you can use traditional methods to go and hunt it, rather than needing to go through menus and get people to load into the same instance. The only use case is obviously for just firing up an expedition style environment where you can just explore zones with friends. I feel like with the build up to the game and with what we were shown, all of us were really expecting something less restrictive and easier than creating an environment link where you were able to see and hunt with people freely out in the open world, provided that you were in the same lobby, or even in a link party if you wanted to go on an expedition instead of a 4-player quest. I would also like to see the squad lobby limit increased to 100, and also for there to be a target monster option in the lobby search, just like there was in past games. Next, I want to get into the meat and potatoes, the content Wilds is providing on launch, and this is the biggest bug up my ass with respect to a lack of improvement and taking on feedback and looking at what has worked and not worked in the past. Content is such a vague and almost meaningless word these days, so I am going to propose that in the context of Monster Hunter, the content of the game is supported and defined by these 3 main things: difficulty, roster, and the endgame system, with a 4th minor element being optionals and side quests like NPC requests. I think that it is a good thing that Capcom are prepared to offer free title updates that add to the roster, the difficulty, and expand the endgame system. What I'm disappointed in is that we are in a position, again, very similar to World and very similar to Rise, where there is so little on offer on release that we are sitting here at the end, after about 100 hours of gameplay, waiting to be drip-fed this new content. MH4U had a relic weapon and armor system 10 years ago on the 3DS. G-Rank or not, there is precedent for robust endgame systems in Monster Hunter offering difficulty and progression after HR is uncapped. People forget that even though guild quests were introduced in 4U, the quests themselves could be had as early as low rank, and the progression with that system started at quests as low as level 1, continued through high rank, and then capped at 140 in G rank. The launch Arshin system is extremely bare bones, and in its current form, it is not allowing the full utilization of the strong roster here on launch. Later in this video, when I get into discussing the roster, I want to propose a complete rework of the relic system and how I would personally scrap the current endgame and replace it with something else. Fighting Tempered Arkveld plus something else over and over again for relic parts is not enough to keep players engaged until title updates arrive. Gaijin Hunter actually said in his latest video titled "Enjoy Harder Hunts" flatly that he is not engaging with the relic system.
If you're not engaging with the relic system like myself, or,
I'll admit that what we have on launch is a very, very minor improvement from base World with deco farming and base Rise with talisman melding.
Deco farming was complete horseshit.
Let's be fair here, that is such a low bar to clear when this series has demonstrated many times in previous games that it can deliver engaging endgame systems. Is it too much to ask for something more substantial than something a lot of players are not even participating in? With Wilds, it is basically just Tempered Arkveld Hunter in order to get parts, with the rare Tempered Apex quests offering less in terms of parts but a much needed breather in terms of hunt variety. Personally, I was expecting more than a very minor improvement over launch world in terms of endgame content, with the amount of development time and the amount of player feedback over the last 7 years. It was a slog and it felt awful with world having to wait for updates like KT and the Arch-Tempered because I wanted to keep playing more. I wanted to keep enjoying the gameplay and keep progressing in terms of gear because that is the main draw of Monster Hunter. But there simply was not enough to do in the interim to justify me mindlessly hunting for no gain. With the hype and build up for Wild starting late 2023, all of us were so excited to get into the game and experience that progression and gameplay loop that we all love about Monster Hunter once again. No doubt a lot of people took time off work and were getting into the Monster Hunter mindset for this game. And for me at least, I got to the end and I was like, damn, we're at this same point again. I wanted to see a system even in high rank that can keep players engaged and keep facilitating that awesome Monster Hunter gameplay loop to keep people playing regardless of title updates, and we did not get that. I think a lot of folks are going to go back to other Monster Hunter games while they wait for Wilds to develop and add more content. And I think that is such a shame that we are now basically seeing a live service model being applied to Monster Hunter that started with World, and that is the justification for the lack of an endgame. If you're going to make the game more live service-like, is it unfair for me to ask for something more substantial at a baseline instead of backloading a lot of the content to be drip-fed in title updates? Player retention is so huge. If everyone is continuing to play and there is a robust system for players to engage with, then there are going to be more people talking about the game, more social media content, more sales, and just more money circulating in general, instead of people being finished with the game and not playing again until updates arrive. I don't believe a half-decent grind or system has to be G-Rank exclusive, and I think we are going to continue having this issue with base games feeling lacking on release and leaving people wanting more until something robust is present. RNG and repetition are not points of negativity. They can either be done well or not well. And I think there needs to be more thought put into something this important. 4U's guild quests and Sunbreak's afflicted quests and curio crafting are standouts and did a fantastic job of using the roster in a clever way to increase difficulty, hunt for specific items and materials, and give players a system to keep engaging with the game's combat and build crafting. Even looking at the guiding lands in its final state, I think that offered a decent amount of meat for players to sink their teeth into. So that brings me to the roster, and you'll probably be pleased to hear me say that honestly I think the strength and diversity of the new roster is great. It is how it is currently being utilized that is a problem. I made a small chart with some raw data going back to MH1 in terms of base game rosters on launch. The amount of large monsters present in each roster is in my opinion not everything, and it's more complicated than just more is better. Though I do think the amount is instructive. Wilds is pretty in line with previous games with respect to how many new designs we got, even with the Guardians being taken into account. And mostly I think the roster is pretty impactful aside from maybe Hirabami and Rompompolo for me personally. The impact is the most important thing when we talk about roster. As is often the case with size, it's more about how you use it. Take MH3 for example. Overall the roster was tiny, almost as small as MH1 with only 18 total monsters for a base game. But look what it brought. Great Jaggi, Kurapeko, Baroth, Royal Ludroth, Giginox, Gobel in the early and mid game, Agnactor, Barioth, Lagiacris, Sedeus, Gen Moran, Deviljho, and Elatrion in the endgame. Apart from Great Baggy and Urigan, I think all of the new monsters from MH3 were extremely strong entrants and very impactful. I think there being clear tiers within the roster is a good fundamental structure that we've seen as early as MH3 with the starred threat system, and we are seeing that continue with the Apexes and Wilds. I think a lot of people are feeling quite disappointed with the roster because of what was leaked prior to the game's release, Zoshia not being an actual monster that you can fight more than once, and also because the way the endgame is set up, we aren't actually hunting a lot of the roster a large majority of the time. I think the quality of the roster is there, it's again just a shame that the structure in place for us to engage with the roster fully is not there to support it. There was a reason to hunt specific mobs, even low tier mobs, for relics, curio materials, and augmentation materials with guild quests, afflicted monsters, and the guiding lands. There is no such thing here on launch with Wilds. so we see the lack of an endgame kind of undermining how an otherwise strong roster is engaged with. It might have been good to have a few more older monsters thrown in to fill out the roster a little bit, mostly to help with gear options. With some weapon types, there are very limited and in some cases only one option for an element of a given type, or even raw, as well as more specific things like gun launch shelling and the bow guns. Right now, Arshan weapons are almost all marginally better than their craftable counterparts, with some exceptions. Which is a shame because a lot of the monster craftable weapons are being ignored and completely skipped. With a few more monster craftable options, I would have completely scrapped the Arshan crafting system and just made the endgame more akin to 4U guild quests. For example, you could go out into the field and hunt a tempered doshiguma. It would provide you with an investigation at level 86 that you could increase to 150, and doshiguma would have a certain pool of weapons, perhaps its own weapons and armor, that you could find with adjusted and randomized stats and skills and a different skin or color palette, with the best rewards being at max quest level and the difficulty of the monster scaling as the level raises. This system that I just came up with in 2 minutes off the top of my head would facilitate engagement with more of the roster and would be able to be adjusted and updated throughout the game's life cycle, through title updates and into a G-Rank DLC. Next, I want to just touch on the third thing having an effect on the content: the difficulty. Difficulty is subjective. In Monster Hunter, you are largely responsible for the difficulty you encounter to a certain point. Monster Hunter is a game that rewards preparation and knowledge, more so in the older games where it was punishing if you didn't eat or left items out of your loadout or didn't bring the right equipment, because there was a lack of quality of life in old gen. If you're a newer player, there are going to be plenty of challenges in Wilds because there is so much to learn in terms of mechanics, items, and combat. If you're a vet like myself and the knowledge and preparation are not an issue for you, you can kind of customize the difficulty a little bit. I used mostly rank 1 armor and the Barina longsword all the way until HR 35 with Jinder Hard, where I built some Blango pieces and a fire weapon, and then I was good to go until the endgame. I also chose to just never call my secret during combat, so no breaking away to heal on the mount or to sharpen and reapply buffs. I say all this not to toot my own hunting horn, but to say that I had fun and had a good challenge through a lot of the progression because I chose to progress and see how far I could go with limited resources before I needed to re-gear. I don't think that the gear is causing a problem. It really ever does in Monster Hunter. You go as far as you can with the skills and knowledge you have before you need to farm and upgrade. I carded a few times throughout the progression, my first being to low rank Doshiguma, but I never got stuck or walled until HR Jin, where with around 50 defense, I was just getting one shot by everything it had and my skill as a player had reached its limits. Once you uncap, Tempered Gore at max strength is really the only thing that has been challenging for me with the amount of damage it does and some of the new moves it has. The main thing I'll say regarding the difficulty and the encounters is that the combination of paralysis, wound breaking, stuns, mounting, part breaking, environmental traps, offsets, and power clashes are all providing an insane amount of CC that is just trivializing too many hunts. And this is amplified because a lot of the endgame farming in the game's current state is in the form of 2 monster quests, so everything has half the amount of health. Wound breaking especially feels very overtuned with how much damage it does and the amount of staggers and topples you can chain from it combined with timing amongst other CC. It feels way too strong. Players have become more skilled with the series, having more experience with the general flow of combat, and also in terms of knowledge, understanding mechanics, and how to prepare with gear. People have talked about this more and more the last few years. More so starting with Rise, where hunters have received more and more additions to their weapons and combat mechanics, and monsters have been struggling to keep up as a result. The combat is in a great state with Wilds, we just need an adjustment to some of the CC, and with a more substantial endgame, no doubt the base parameters of monsters having more health, damage, and speed are going to increase. Put all of these things together, CC being too strong, the endgame system not being robust enough, and players becoming more skilled, you are going to get a lot of players thinking the game is too easy. And when the game is too easy, and there isn't enough challenging content for players to engage with and feel rewarded, you are going to get players like myself wanting more. Now, I want to cover performance from a different perspective here rather than bang on about things you've heard everyone talk about by now. Sungrand Studios, Digital Foundry, and a number of other folks have made great videos detailing the optimization issues and why the game is struggling in certain areas with performance. In 2018, I built my first PC for Monster Hunter World when I was 18. It ran a Ryzen 5 2600 and a 1050 Ti. I am now going to put some clips on screen that I have saved from 7 years ago from that PC running the game on this hardware. I'd like to remind everyone that the performance on launch for mhwilds on PC was pretty rocky, and we were working with a lot less in terms of hardware back then too. I was running the game at 1080p on low to medium settings, hitting close to 60 FPS. And honestly, all things considered for the time, I think it looked great and it still holds up okay. And this is back in a time where frame gen and even upscaling methods like DLSS and FSR did not exist. You were running the game native and that was it. Now that I'm older and working instead of being at school, I'm running a very high-end setup with a 5800X 3D and a 4080, outputting to an LG C4 4K 144Hz 42-inch OLED as my main display with 2 additional other displays. So my current hardware is somewhere in the range of about 9 times as powerful on the GPU side and at least twice as powerful on the CPU side for gaming performance. I am having to use a 1080p internal render with DLSS performance, upscaling that image to 4K, and then enabling frame gen to achieve a half decent frame rate. I'm a tick over 60 FPS without frame gen and near 100 on. This recording you're seeing is at 2K through OBS at CQP medium and is costing me about 5% of my performance. So keep that in mind if you're looking at the top left. I am running the game in HDR, and this is also with a customized reshade profile to assist that and expand the luminance range a little bit since the game looks very drab and washed out in so many areas. All this money spent on a high-end setup, all this time spent benchmarking, dialing in settings and adjustments just to run a game at 1080p internal render with frame gen, when I was running mhwilds 7 years ago on a dogshit PC at 1080p native without frame gen, without all these things to assist the game, and it looked pretty damn decent. The question with performance and visuals for me is, were the design decisions regarding the open world and environmental elements of the game worth the performance cost? The Steam reviews and community at large say no. Not one time have I traversed between locales on foot, other than the on-rail in-game cutscenes where they show that this is possible. I fast travel to the different towns in each locale to speak with NPCs. I use my map between quests to look at potential quest targets. I choose a target, the quest departure window opens, and if it is in a different locale to what I'm in, then there is a loading screen and I spawn into the quest just as you have done in every other Monster Hunter game before this. When are we actually using and engaging with the open world to justify the cost and performance and this change in design philosophy when everyone was and still is perfectly happy with having a town or hub with a lobby, posting a quest and loading into a zone? The only time I'm going out into the world is to go and collect upsurges and complete side content like crowns and doing fishing. And you still need to go through a loading screen in order to change and load into the zone you want. Functionally, it is barely any different to World especially, and even older gen games. We also don't have a gathering hub on release, and I know a lot of players have been talking about its exclusion, saying that they miss that feeling of being connected and in a communal environment with other players, which is strange since we have 100 player lobbies where you can see other players in base camps. I think that is because most people don't go into 100 player lobbies and they are either playing in a squad lobby, private lobby, or even link party just with friends. We are often in a different locale and therefore can't see each other. Most of the time when I've been playing with friends, we can't see each other, but we are just posting quests from wherever we happen to be, readying up and then loading into the quest like we have done in past Monster Hunter games. We're just missing that lobby area that the Gathering Hub would provide, and I think that is actually going to minimize the usefulness of the open world elements even more, but we'll have to see when Title Update 1 arrives. Touching on the weather system quickly, when you fire up a quest it will start with one of the 3 weather conditions, and sometimes during a quest you may experience the weather shift one time to something else, which only serves as a visual change, and if it's an inclemency it will also incur a performance cost. Outside of quests, the weather states barely impact anything at all other than monster spawns. Not once have I rested to change the weather looking for quests or certain targets like multi-quests. I have spent more time resting to change the time of day and weather for fishing and catching endemic life than I have for influencing the actual gameplay or the open world. Last thing here on the open world before some closing comments on the gameplay, pop-up camps. What was wrong with normal camps? They were functionally the exact same. They didn't put pop-up messages on your screen every 5 seconds blocking you from opening the map, and they didn't become unusable as fast travel points during a hunt because they can be destroyed. Yet another fucking bizarre and unnecessary change that isn't an improvement, just an annoyance. Saving the best for last here because I really don't have much negative feedback to give in terms of gameplay and combat other than what I spoke about with CC and wound breaking needing to be adjusted. The only thing I can think of would be mounting. I think mounting is in a pretty bad spot at the moment. The damage reduction while someone is mounted just feels like a waste of sharpness, so I barely attack anymore. I usually just take time to sharpen, heal, and reapply buffs, and I don't know if that is really a great answer for what players are supposed to do while waiting for someone to get the topple from a mount. Possibly a return to old gen where you didn't do any damage with the blue hit effects from hitting a mounted monster, but you did increase the monster's progress bar to getting the topple, assisting them by reducing the risk of the bar filling up in time and the mounter being thrown off. If I have gotten mounts, personally I have been dismounting straight away so that everyone can just continue doing damage and carry on with the fight as normal. I see a lot of folks in online play also doing this, and to be honest it probably works out similarly in terms of damage if everyone keeps their uptime going versus the knockdown from the mount being completed. Mounting feels pretty disruptive to gameplay, and I think the UI with the vignette and the monster thrashing around has needed to improve since World. I'm glad to see the Slinger return, the Clutch Claw is now gone, and the addition or gimmick of the combat this time around with Focus Mode and Wounds has been awesome. Focus Mode raises the floor and makes the combat of Monster Hunter a lot more accessible for new players, and I think it raises the ceiling for skilled and veteran players to do more with the weapons and reward precision and timing. I've been using Focus Mode holding down on my backside mouse button, and I think it's just been a ton of fun to use, and it provides more options while in combat. I use it on some weapons more than others, which is how I think it should be, and it obviously has been a much bigger benefit for some weapon types where otherwise poor mobility and certain attack animations can be supplemented with a more controlled aim. Having the option to toggle or hold is nice, and if you still want to play more traditional Monster Hunter with positioning and conventional aiming via the camera and directional inputs, that is still there, and you don't even have to use focus mode at all to be effective in combat, which is great to see. Base world combat was great too. It was just with Iceborne where the main issue with the combat was that it was such a disadvantage to not use the Clutch Claw, and it was something that felt kind of like a chore that we needed to do to really play effectively, whether it was keeping an area tenderized or wall banging while not enraged. And these options with engagement also extend to the wound system. You don't have to be using focus mode or even focus strikes to create, attack, or even break weak points. Some weapon types do want to use focus strike more than others for certain mechanics, but I think overall this new combat system has done a great job of returning to simple, core combat with the wound system there for people to engage with if they so choose throughout a hunt, if they'd like to really dial in during combat. Sometimes I want to just get in and play more casually, and I'm not looking to hog all the wounds and break everything as soon as I see it. I'm happy just getting a little bit more damage off by targeting weak spots and just letting other people do focus strikes so that they can play their weapons more optimally. And I think having these options during combat is fantastic. The core combat is an evolution of Worlds combat, which I think has been done very well. It is slower compared to Rise, and you are not as mobile, so positioning is more key, and I like being rewarded for that. Positioning has been the main foundation of Monster Hunter combat since old gen, and it's important for the series that remains the case since evading without evade window is much less viable in Monster Hunter than rolling to avoid damage in a lot of other third-person action games. Monster Hunter has always rewarded a more methodical playstyle, and that has been expanded upon since 4th gen, introducing more fluid combat mechanics like guard points and counters in order to mitigate damage rather than just evading. And then with 5th gen, where Rise obviously took this up a notch again from World. Without bringing all of the crazy moves from Rise and Sunbreak, it is good to see that there has been some carryover with certain moves like Switch Axe Burst Counter being implemented in the form of a less powerful sword mode only counter. Having the kit expanded for all of the weapons without there being certain moves that everybody spams and relies on for damage that are tied to a Hunter Art or Wirebug cooldown is great, and I think that is the direction the series needs to keep progressing in. The weapons already have higher damage options for scenarios where you can fire off a full combo or you aren't at risk of being punished. What matters the most are the changes made and utility updates that you'll be using for 75% of the hunt, fighting in neutral, and what options you have there that really enhance the combat, and I think Wilds has done an excellent job of improving on that. Of course, Rise and GU still have more variety in regards to what you can actually do. Being able to alternate or change movesets in some way is a great way to prolong players' enjoyment with the game and incentivize experimentation with new weapons, builds, and playstyles. So I do think the re-implementation of styles or switch skills but without Hunter Arts and Wirebug attacks would be interesting to see, with more of a focus on giving players more options for core movesets instead of powerful moves on cooldowns. There is already a lot of resource management in Monster Hunter combat, and that for me was the thing about Rise and Sunbreak that always sent me back to playing World. Having to manage Wirebug cooldowns for both mobility and attacks, and then having 2 scroll options with Sunbreak just felt like a complete overdose on all these different combat mechanics. Additionally, there were a whole host of skills introduced in Sunbreak, leading to the min-maxing of swapping scrolls and adding more mechanics to keep track of. Berserk, Dereliction, Furious, Mail of Hellfire, Quick Breath, and Redirection alongside Wirebug Whisperer introduced in base Rise.
Sometimes it feels like the main thing I'm doing is managing cooldowns and meters, where instead these things were just supposed to be extra to a gameplay that was already solid to begin with.
Thanks again, Henry. Please go check out Herney's video in full on No More Wirebugs. It's a great watch, and he covers this very point on the importance of diverse core combat without all these mechanics getting in the way of enjoying just a good old cheeseburger. The weapon types all have updated core kits with Wilds, and you have a lot more options on weapons coming from Iceborne. Guarding, for example, is now way more powerful and versatile on more weapons with the addition of Perfect Guard. Greatsword and SNS are now able to actually follow up with attacks instead of just being stuck in place or suffering so much recoil that just made guarding not worth using versus rolling or tackle. And then of course Lance and Gunlance gaining more moveset options out of their perfect guards. I will say it does feel a lot better having the timing be a factor for all of the weapons without the need for guard points or it being a benefit exclusive to the Lance moveset, because that is what I loved about MH World Lance, was that it actually felt good to time your power guards and your counter guards and then attack out of it when you had finished being on the defensive. So it's nice to see that concept being expanded for more of the weapons, despite it maybe undermining Lance a little bit. There is an excellent amount of diversity within movesets to keep you engaged. Greatsword, for example, with everything that has been added now, has a constant decision tree, whether you're charging and then possibly having to tackle, whether you're guarding first, then go into your charge, or whether you're offset charging instead. Something like Switch Axe, it's now a lot more common that you're in axe mode for offset and to charge your sword gauge. Whether you need to be in axe or sword mode is now a lot more of a decision, instead of it being that you basically never used axe mode in past games, since both modes now have a defensive tool. Deciding when to switch modes and timing your defensive options is very satisfying and has expanded upon the weapon a ton, from just running focus to keep the gauge juiced up and always using sword mode to just spam zero-sum discharge over and over again while just rolling and positioning for your next one while your sword is charged. Power Clash, I think, is a small addition and benefit to the combat that I do like, and it does feel satisfying to land, and it is a lot easier than offsetting. It gives a small window for some extra damage and doesn't feel overtuned at all, so I think that is in a good state currently. I would just like to see in future maybe a tidy up of the animations, because some of them, especially Doshiguma while clashing, look very janky, and maybe some more attacking options during or finishing a clash would be nice too, instead of just spamming one button. I think offsets are a straight up up upgrade to the combat without feeling overtuned. The knockdown is on a cooldown and the mob is not actually stunned in place that long unless it's a dunk. They are very satisfying to land, and you are still rewarded for good play by not taking damage if you land it and the knockdown is still on cooldown. They incentivize timing, knowledge of your weapon, and knowledge of the monster's moveset. It's a great risk-reward system that helps keep you engaged during gameplay, and it's fun testing yourself in this sort of minigame throughout the fight if you can really dial in and commit to moves that you can easily be punished for if you don't have your timing on point. There are many things that Wilds is doing better than ever. There just also happen to be many things it is doing poorly. This franchise has gone through so much, and I want it to succeed and continue to learn and become better. Making this video, I fired up my 3DS to grab a photo of my For You playtime, and I actually pressed continue just to load into the game. I said to myself, damn man, this series has come so far, and I look at all the things that have changed and the amount of improvement from World onwards. That is really the word of this video, improvement. That is why Monster Hunter has grown into a juggernaut. I think I've covered a wide array of topics that were jumping out to me the most in this video. Obviously there are so many points of discussion going on in the community right now, but this video is already long enough. If enough people do end up seeing this and are raising other points in the comments, I look forward to reading what people have to say and bringing up things that I have definitely missed and not covered here. If you've made it through to the end here, then you're an absolute legend, and I just want to say thank you. Until next time, happy hunting guys.